Hello folks, welcome along to this week's edition of Garage Area. Now, regretfully, this week's edition will be rain shortened and probably postponed due to an outbreak of rain. We unfortunately could not move forward the recording time of this podcast due to TV rights and that, and no, we couldn't put rain tyres on the microphone. So, yes, obviously, this podcast may be a bit short because there's actually not much racing to talk about. So what I'm going to do, this podcast will discuss some topics relating to the total washout last night, and I'll record a separate podcast later in the week, a special edition of Garage Area, actually talking about the racing at Atlanta. That's if we can get it in. Fingers crossed. We should be running the Advocare 500 on Tuesday. Hopefully. We will see. But for now, this podcast will go ahead at the scheduled time, and we'll discuss the issue of rain races, which obviously was the big thing yesterday. Now I'm going to start with the scheduling of rain races themselves, because a big argument this week, especially on the NASCAR.com comment boards and everywhere else, was NASCAR knew the weather was going to be shit. Why couldn't they move the start of the race? I'm sorry, not as easy as that. Now, I know the whole excuse for sponsor commitments is not one that people like to hear, but that is only part of the story. What we're talking about with the NASCAR race is a huge, massive event with a lot of people, tens of thousands of fans turning up. It's not that easy to just send the word out by, I don't know, smoke signal or whatever you assume to do it, saying, oh guys, we've just moved the start of the race 6 hours forward. Those of you that are already setting out and aren't due to get here for another 5 hours, sorry about that, you may have missed half the race before the time we get here. Now, you could easily say, well, why didn't they make this decision? Why don't they make that decision to move the start of the race forward about a week in advance? Wrong again. Have you ever noticed how inaccurate 7-day weather forecasts are? The weather is a bitch, basically. It is very hard to predict, even with these why do you think these meteorologists, weather people, weather scientists, I don't know, whatever you call them, meteorologists, I still can't say it. I'm going to give up now. Weather scientists. Why do you think these people involved in predicting the weather have to spend millions and millions of dollars on the technology and still can't get the forecasts right? That's because weather is a very tough thing to predict. You really can't do it with any great accuracy. So, can you imagine a hypothetical scenario where NASCAR decided it's likely going to be raining on Sunday, let's move the start time forward 6 hours, a week in advance. And then, at the earliest start time, it rained. And then on Sunday evening, it was quite dry. NASCAR would end up with a large amount of egg on its face. As I said, the weather is a very hard thing to predict. I should know. I've been to drag racing events here in England, and before we have been to drag race events where the night before it was predicted rain, and like NASCAR, drag racing doesn't go forward in the rain, but on the Sunday it has been beautiful sunshine and the hottest day of the year. You can't vouch for it. I mean, I know that's the British weather, which is traditionally rather unpredictable, but my point is the weather is a very hard thing to predict for. So, trying to reschedule a race to bring it forward is a very risky game. Putting it back, yes, it does inconvenience people, of course. Not as many people will be able to watch it on the Tuesday. Fortunately, I should be able to, touch wood. But it's better than having no race at all, and, as I said, with NASCAR getting egg on their faces. So they want to try and put in a race as possible, so they have to try. I mean, they tried moving the start forward, and then it started raining when the race had been brought forward by 20 minutes, and then it started raining then. The weather was just screwing around with the race. It was like, oh, you're going to try and avoid me? I'm just going to rain now. So I was sitting here at about 1 a.m. in the morning here at my computer when I heard that the jet dryers would minimum take 2 hours to dry the track, and then it was probably only 50% likely we'd actually get any sort of racing in then. That's when I bailed. I admit I bailed on it, and in the end I was proven right. I mean, I admit I could have had some spectacular egg on my face myself if I'd woken up and had missed a spectacular Advocare 500 that had been fitted in amongst bouts of rain. But to be honest, I didn't see it happening, and in the end that was the case. Now, fans are saying, well, we could see that the rain was likely to disrupt proceedings, why couldn't you? As I said before, unpredictable. The weather is... I must keep stressing this, because people assume we can predict anything nowadays with the weather forecast and everything. It's an unpredictable thing. Mother Nature You can't follow her. She's like most women. You can't follow. You can't track her with radar. So basically, it's a pretty poor situation, but in the end, on balance, I mean, I know we love to paint NASCAR as the villain in these things. It's easy to slag them off or to bash them. But to be honest, I really don't think there was any other way they could proceed. And to any of you naysayers that have popped up on the NASCAR.com fan boards, yes, I'm talking to you, the ones who suddenly come up and say, oh, well, we never had this problem over at Fontana. Shut up! It's easy enough to be wise after the event, or to have several years of utterly tedious racing on Labor Day weekend over at California. So even you have been saying, oh, the race has been boring, we need to move it. They've moved it to Atlanta, it's rained. Oh, we never had this problem at California. Yes, but we had the bigger problem of the races being boring and nobody wanted to watch them anyway. Personally, I don't see why the race can't be moved back to Darlington. All the legal wrangling's blown over. That was apparently what meant that Darlington lost the Labor Day race. So all the legal wrangling's blown over. Why can't they just go schedule realignment back to Darlington, where it should be? And any questions about attendances, I think, have been answered by the fact that the one remaining Darlington race has sold out the last 6 years straight. Fans obviously love the track. It's the traditional venue for the Southern 500, the Labor Day weekend race. Move it back there. Anyway, that's by the by. We're dealing at the moment where it's at Atlanta, which is a good track. It's a good track to have it at because it's a traditional circuit. It's been on the NASCAR calendar for many, many years, and it produces good racing. Although Kyle Busch would beg to disagree. He thinks it's becoming a bit mono-groove. Apparently after the nationwide race he said, oh, it's going to be a wreck fest, you know, because the bottom groove's the fastest. But you can pick some holes in that argument. Because I read it on the article on the NASCAR.com. Allow me to go off on a tangent for a second. I read that article, and he said his car, he couldn't get it running on the high side. So he's basically of the opinion that just because he, the great racer that he is, cannot race on the high side, no one else can. Yeah, brilliant one, Kyle. We're only talking about a track that is famous for having two grooves, one at the bottom, one up top, and even one in the middle, and it's famous for having very tight finishes where one guy gets a run on the outside of a guy coming down on the inside for a close finish. Yeah, genius, Kyle. Why don't you go back to the garage area and work on your car and see if it can run on the outside like everyone else? Anyway, back on topic, vaguely. Obviously, this discussion about rain brings up the discussion of rain tyres, and it's quite ironic because somebody, I can't remember their name, I will add an annotation in the description of this video, of the podcast rather, who it was, but there was a YouTube user in the comments of the last podcast I posted up on YouTube, said, can you talk about rain tyres in the next one? Well, whoever it was, you're in luck. I've got the perfect excuse to do it. So now we shall talk about the burning issue of rain tyres. Burning issue. That's probably the wrong word. The rather moist issue of wet tyres. Something like that. Anyway, basically, here's my view. I'll basically spell it out straight in plain lettering for you. My view. Rain tyres on ovals? No. Rain tyres on road courses? Yes. Let me explain. Rain tyres on ovals have been tested by many leading lights and are proven generally not to work because on an oval you carry a very, very high speed, average speed. And the rain tyres, and the normal tyres have to take a lot of heat in them. I mean, we have tyre problems at tracks anyway, with the right front and the right rear cording, going down to the cords. How do you expect Goodyear or somebody to build a tyre that not only copes with wear and tear across 500 miles, but also deals with having to grip through rain? I mean, that's difficult enough to do anyway. But seeing as Goodyear sometimes struggle to put out a decent dry tyre in the dry, that's a big ask. Ovals, it's a very high speed. As soon as the track begins to dry vaguely, the tyres will literally shred. They do this on dry circuits, on road courses anyway. As soon as the track begins to dry, you literally see drivers swerving to the damp bits to keep the temperature up in the tyres. As soon as a wet tyre hits a dry track, shred, they're gone. And as we know on ovals, there's a big fat thing running around the outside called a concrete wall. It's not like a road course where there's gravel or tarmac or a tyre wall or a safer barrier. And an oval, high banking, you're doing 160 miles an hour, one slip in the rain, and you're up in the wall. And people are assuming that wet tyres are the cure-all. Have you seen a road course race on wet tyres? It's still not a cure-all. It's still slippy. It just improves the grip from none at all to a bit. Just because you have wet tyres on doesn't mean you can drive as fast as you can in the dry. This is what some people, I think, miss the point of on the ovals. So, I mean, somebody did suggest maybe on some of the shorter flat tracks, such as Martinsville and that, where the average speed is not very fast anyway, which is quite a good point. I would want to see that tested, because obviously there's no banking there. Bristol, very high banked. Martinsville, Phoenix, New Hampshire, flat tracks, possibly. I would like to see that tested. Which brings me on to the subject of where I think Wayne, I'm turning into Jonathan Ross, where rain tyres should be used, which is road courses. Now, obviously, we had this furore, and I had this discussion with quite a few people back at Watkins Glen when it was rain delayed, and that brings me on to the subject of how the Nationwide Series race ran a few years in the rain at Montreal, seemingly without too many problems. But obviously, the traditionalists, I know there's a lot of traditionalists in NASCAR say, no, rain tyres, and so I feel it compelled, I've wanted to do this for a while, now we're on the subject of rain in general, let me pick apart a few of the arguments that I heard against racing in the rain on a road course. Number one, the racing will be boring. What? Have you watched a Formula 1 race in the rain? On the rain tyres? Nah, I didn't think so. Montreal this year. Montreal seems to generate really good races anyway, but the Montreal Formula 1 race generated some very good racing because it was raining, it rained hard, and the race actually had to be stopped, which I'll get onto in a minute. And then it dried out again, and there was all sorts of strategy with guys pitting in, when to put on rain tyres, when not to, how to drive the track, how to set up your car to race in the rain. And in the end, it was a thrilling finale where one guy, Jensen Button, his English driver, you may have heard of him, charged through the field with a great rain setup and snatched the win on the final lap. It was fantastic. So, racing in the rain is a different style of racing, but not boring. Not boring. It may be slower because the drivers are having to tread round and, find the limits of grip, but it is a whole different thing altogether. Strategy comes into it a lot more, and there's a lot of skill. If you can race fast in the rain, you are cemented. I mean, that is what cemented the reputations of countless Formula 1 greats like Ayrton Senna, Michael Schumacher. As soon as the rain came down, they would just cruise away. They would dominate. They would utterly own the field in the wet. So, that is an argument. That's the counter-argument against racing being boring. It'll be different. It won't be as tight and frenetic as usual, but it'll be a different kind of racing. Now, I mentioned the Formula 1 Grand Prix at Montreal being stopped because of rain. This leads me on to the second point. People saying, oh, at Montreal a few years ago, it was a wreck fest. The race had to be stopped anyway. Well, the Formula 1 Grand Prix this year at Montreal had to be stopped anyway because it started absolutely bucketing it down with rain. There was literally about 4 or 5 inches of standing water on the track. There was no way anyone could race. So basically what I'm saying is, anyone who says, oh, rain tyres don't work anyway, the race will still be stopped, no, it will only be stopped at a point where any other racing series in the world would stop the race. There is not a racing series in the world, even Formula 1, that would race in the sort of rain that we saw a few years ago at Montreal where people started piling up, or the rain we saw at the Montreal Grand Prix this year. They stopped the race. And at first, I was sitting there going, oh, why are they stopping? Come on, this is stupid. And then I saw how hard it was coming down, and I thought, no, do you know what? Fair enough. There's no way they can race in that conditions. With the spray, total lack of grip, there's nothing. There was no way they could do it. So, obviously, if it's a really, really hard downpour, like almost a flash flood, racing still wouldn't go ahead. But on drizzle and other such things, fine, rain tyres would do it. And as we saw at Montreal, obviously the first few laps were tiptoeing. That's because nobody had set the cars up for the rain, really, and it was completely untried. First time they'd ever done it. But after a few laps, they were starting to get it. They were starting to drive pretty nicely, and they were getting on with it. And to be honest, until the deluge, there was pretty good racing. It wasn't a wreck fest at all. It was not a wreck fest. And those are people who say, oh, it was a wreck fest. Yeah, only when it started bucketing down and you couldn't actually see where you're going and there was no tyre grip at all, and where any other race series in the world would just go, no, Scott, sod that, I ain't driving in that. So those are basically the two main arguments. I'm trying to think of any more off the top of my head, really. The cars aren't designed for it. That's a good one. Or the drivers aren't used to it. Fair enough. That's a pretty fair point. But to be honest, all drivers have to learn somewhere. So if this is introduced through the touring divisions, NASCAR drivers, by the time they get to Sprint Cup, will be versed in it. Obviously, the guys running at the moment won't be. But we keep saying we like to hype up NASCAR drivers as some of the best in the world. I'm sure they can learn. I think we're devaluing them. I think we're saying, protecting them from themselves, maybe. They should be given the chance to learn. Maybe, here's a radical thought, if we're going to proceed with rain tyres, have a test at Watkins Glen or Road America or something, and, I don't know, just hose the track down. you know, wait until the wet season, wait until it's been raining, have an open test. Let all the drivers figure out how to race the cars in the rain, and let them learn. I mean, obviously some will still be at an advantage. Marcus Ambrose raced a lot in the rain in the V8 supercars in Australia. Montoya, the same in the Formula 1. But it will even the field up. And I do grant you, obviously the NASCAR drivers aren't used to racing in the rain, but there are ways around that. The cars themselves aren't particularly built to race in the rain, but they can easily be tweaked. At Montreal a few years ago, they had windscreen wipers installed. They disconnected the rear tow bar to sort of loosen up the car to get around the corners. But a problem, obviously the lasting image of that race was Carl Edwards with his little squeegee thing sort of stuck out the window, sort of going, trying to demist the windscreen of his car, which was quite funny. So if we are going to proceed with rain tyres, then I'd say make the cars all weatherproof. Obviously they bring a specific road course cars to races nowadays, I think. So, and this wouldn't be too easy to do, fit a pair of headlights and brake lights, put a sort of demister thing in the car. Obviously that would be difficult because they have the window net, so it's an open window in the car. See if you can climatise the windshield a little more, have lights on it, demisters, build in a setup for the car to be able to loosen it up a little more, make them more road course and weather friendly. It wouldn't be that hard, I don't believe. And you would have local yellows obviously on the track so people spin off, and people would have to adapt their driving, as I said earlier. So basically, as far as I can see, that's about all the arguments against road course racing in the rain dealt with and shot down. So for me, I can't see any reason why not. On the ovals, no. Still a lot of testing to go to better tyre that works there. So this has been the rained out special of Garage Area. Like I say, I'll be back later in the week, hopefully when the Advocare 500 has been run, and I'll bring you a full rundown of all of the racing, including the Nationwide and Truck Series races. I'll just bring you the whole weekend, or weekend and half week, of racing at Atlanta. But until then, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I want to hear from you. Get in touch. If you're jumping up and down in your seat, furiously disagreeing with everything I've said, I want to hear from you. Let me know, and I want to get a discussion going in the comments or whatever. And in the meantime, have fun. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and I'll see you later in the week. Hopefully, we'll be going racing at Atlanta. I'll see you then.